effort to ensure none of them be seated. On November 1st, 2010, despite all that effort, the judge ruled that with a jury pool of over 85,000 eligible citizens, the 0.2% of the population that commented on those news articles did not pose enough threat. District Judge Catherine Curtis did not grant the requested change of venue, but reserved the right to do so later should it become necessary. Trial began in January of 2011, nearly 2 years following the crash. Justine was now a senior in high school. Prosecutors laid out the case for the jury. Young lovers argue, threats bombard his phone as she drives around upset. Then, silence. Not only were the text messages sent between Justine and Ryan presented as evidence, but other evidence such as previous behavior, photos from the scene, and information gathered from Justine's vehicle data recorder came together and formed the foundation of the prosecution's case. State crash reconstruction experts would show how Justine's vehicle crossed over the highway into oncoming traffic, colliding with Erin and Caden's vehicle, which was traveling at about 31 miles per hour. Due to the construction on the overpass, there were lane restrictions and temporary barriers in place, leaving Erin nowhere to swerve should she have had the time. Trooper Glenn Barkis testified that police were able to immediately ascertain that Justine's Grand Am left the southbound lane of Highway 93 and entered into Erin and Caden's northbound lane, hitting them head-on. Barkis recalled that Justine was likely not wearing her seatbelt. It would have been stretched, ripped, or in a different position than the locked upright state in which Justine's was found post-crash. There was no evidence of skid or tire marks that would indicate that Justine tried to avoid the crash or to slam on her brakes. Flathead County Sheriff's Detective Kip Tkachuk read through the text exchange, which took place between the teens from 7:51 p.m., when Justine left Ryan's house, and about 8:19 p.m., just a few minutes before the collision. He alone was solely responsible for getting both of the teens' phones to the FBI to have official transcripts of the messages retrieved. Ryan Langford, now a Montana State University student, took the stand for the prosecution. Ryan admitted that he was worried about Justine once she stopped responding to his text messages. He maintained, however, that he still believed that she wasn't capable of hurting a fly, and that the seemingly intentional collision was nothing more than a horrendous coincidence. He called her the nicest person he knew. Ryan testified that he would not characterize himself or his behavior as jealous or controlling, although he had already stated that his jealousy over those journal entries began the cataclysmic events of March 19, 2009. Another contradiction occurred when the previous testimony of psychotherapist Teresa Glenwater was not corroborated by Ryan's testimony, although she had treated Justine through parts of 2009 and 2010 and had spoken with Ryan directly during those sessions. Glenwater testified that Justine had indicated that threatening suicide was a tactic Ryan Langford had used before in their relationship. One threat had seemed so daunting that Justine stayed awake all night, calling Ryan's sister early in the morning to check on him. He had turned off his phone once he threatened to shoot himself. Ryan, however, testified that neither he nor Justine had ever threatened suicide before. He did admit to having made the threat, but said that it had occurred prior to the start of their relationship. The psychotherapist's insights were quite startling. Teresa Glenwater testified that she got the feeling that lobbing suicide threats back and forth was a tug-of-war between the two for control in their relationship. She noted that the one unhealthy element present was Ryan's jealousy, and how he used it to control Justine, to the extent that he no longer allowed her to speak to other boys. She would ultimately declare that she had failed to identify any of the traits generally present in suicidal individuals, like depression, social alienation, or a history of drug abuse, alcohol abuse, or impulsive behavior. Back to Ryan's testimony. He basically finished answering the prosecutor's questions with several variations of "I don't know." It seemed as though he had almost as little memory of March 19th as Justine Winter. The prosecution rested at lunchtime and the defense opened after lunch. Their argument was that it was Erin who crossed out of her lane, causing Justine to hit her Subaru, opposite of what the police investigation concluded and what the state presented as its case. Justine's father, Randy Winter, testified that he never knew of his daughter to be suicidal or depressed in any way. He kept firearms in the home, and she never showed any sort of exaggerated or unhealthy interest toward them. The father was also adamant that Justine had always been obsessive about wearing her seatbelt, even more so over the months prior to the crash, as she was a newly licensed driver. Her father testified that her passion for safety even changed his views on always buckling up. Defense psychologist Scott Poland, national expert on teen suicide, testified that the text did not, in his opinion, constitute a suicide note, but empty teenage threats common for this relationship. But it was defense expert Scott Curry, a forensic engineer, who would face the most scrutiny as he feebly attempted to demonstrate how Erin caused her own death along with her children's. Prosecutor Corrigan, on cross-examination, asked questions aimed at casting doubt on Curry's status as an expert witness, considering that he had only one previous crash reconstruction on his professional resume. He accused him of jumping to conclusions. Curry testified that the widespread field of debris made it impossible to ascertain which car was driving in which lane. Not really what you expect to hear from a self-professed expert. Corrigan then brought it to the attention of the courtroom that Curry had previously been fired from the U.S. Forestry Service for failing to follow superiors' orders in regards to a crash reconstruction. The defense attempted to show that wet, rainy conditions may have contributed to the accident, a contention that only this one witness throughout the entire trial testified to. The police investigation did not find weather to have contributed to the collision. During the prosecution's rebuttal, multiple witnesses were called who once again demonstrated how defense expert Scott Curry's testimony was incorrect and grossly inaccurate. Reconstructionist James Pittman firmly stated that the collision did not take place where Curry had contended. Opposing linguists espoused opposing opinions regarding whether or not the text messages constituted a suicide note. The defense would rest without Justine Winter taking the stand to speak for herself. You see, she really wouldn't have had much to say because she didn't remember anything about the night of the accident. This teenager was essentially on trial for homicide she recalled nothing about, which is not surprising considering the head injuries and amount of brain trauma she sustained in the collision. Even the prosecuting attorneys agree that she likely had no recollection. This amnesia caused the second big rift of this case after the civil suit, because the survivors of Erin Thompson and Caden Odell really just wanted to hear Justine say she was sorry, that she was specifically sorry that her intentional actions cut short the lives of beloved individuals, whether that part was intentional or not. But as the trial came to a close and the case went to the jury, no testimony from Justine was forthcoming, and therefore no much-needed apology or explanation of her thoughts or actions of March 19, 2009. Everyone who spent time in the courtroom during this trial had no choice but to stare a remorseless defendant in the face day after day, including the jury. At the last moment, before the jury was released to deliberations, the defense was offered and refused a plea agreement to a lesser charge, which would have resulted in a 4-year prison term. Justine would have had to admit guilt to accept the plea. Instead, after only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned 2 guilty verdicts for the charges of deliberate homicide in the deaths of expectant Erin Thompson and her spunky son Caden. Everyone in the courtroom cried. Randy Winter was not present to hear the verdict. He had been hospitalized just previously for stress-related symptoms. On February 4, 2011, Justine was remanded into custody to await sentencing without being able to speak to or hug her family. As she was led away, she didn't look back. She would turn 18 the following week in jail, awaiting sentencing for murder. About a month later, on March 7, 2011, defense attorney David Stuft filed a motion to have the convictions overturned or for the judge to grant Justine a new trial. Here is an overview of the grounds upon which Stuft felt a new trial was warranted. Juror misconduct may have occurred when a juror supposedly had contact with someone in Justine's family. An eyewitness who had yet to be heard from came forward with contradictory information to the prosecutions. Improper jury instruction pertaining to what constituted deliberate homicide. And the judge showed favor toward the state while simultaneously addressing the defense like she was talking to dogs. Just prior to her sentencing, Justine finally wrote the family of her victims a letter. They hoped it would contain the apology they desperately needed to hear to forgive her and begin to heal away from the spotlight. But what they got was a letter in which Justine called herself a miracle, who would never even think about taking any life, including her own. She called herself wrongly convicted of a crime when really it was an accident blown out of proportion. By the time Erin and Caden's family were ready to speak, it was a tense atmosphere within the courtroom. Normally soft-spoken widower Justine Thompson spit straight fire at defense attorneys Battle and Stuft for instigating the civil suit, advising Justine not to acknowledge the victim's family, and basically manipulating the child negatively. Here is an excerpt from the statement he read at sentencing. The important thing is to apologize, show concern for what you have done, and try to make amends. But have you ever once looked us in the eye? Have you shown or expressed even the slightest bit of sincere sorrow for everything we've been through? We've waited and waited and waited for that. Erin's sister Amber told Justine, "I want to see good things happen for you someday, but I think that one of the biggest things of this you still have yet to grasp is the truth. This tragedy has been, without a doubt, the most life-altering, life-shattering, life-crumbling thing that has ever happened to our family." Caden's father, Craig Odell, showing visible pain and anger throughout his entire being, told Justine that you will never know how incredible he was. And you took him. You did it, and you need to own it. You killed my boy. You need to own it. It was finally time for Justine to address her victim's family, and they could only hope to hear exactly what they needed to forgive and begin the lifelong healing process free of the stress of litigation. What follows is Justine Winter's statement to the court, recorded at her sentencing hearing.
To the family of Erin and Caden and the baby, I know you all have read my in-bag statement, and I just want you guys to know that you may feel that I don't take accountability, but it's not accountability that I need to take. I don't know what it is. But I want you guys to know that I would never hurt anyone by intention, and we don't know. No one will ever know what actually happened on the night of March 19th. Is it even possible that this happened? That I intentionally crossed that center line and took the lives of 3 human beings that I can't even imagine meant to you guys. That other people were taken in this accident, that there was even another vehicle. I've wanted to let you guys know that my heart goes out to you. And as every single one of you came up here today, and shared your heart, My heart was breaking.